All right, people, we are going live. It is a Tuesday at 8 a.m. Apologies again for the delay. Normally we record these about like every Sunday or Monday morning. This past weekend, however, I was stricken with a vicious case of food poisoning that prevented me from being able to record, but I'm back, bounced back 2 days later. Luke, we are back, ready to go, continuing with our straightforward promise of getting you guys an episode of our Lost recap every week of the year up until the final week of the year. So, Luke, we are on season 1. I believe this makes us past the halfway point now of this season, if I'm not mistaken.
Looks like it.
Yeah, just about. Season 1, episode 12 or 13, depending on how you're going, based off if you count the pilot as 1 or 2 episodes. Whatever the case may be, this is our second solo Kate episode of the season and of the series so far. We already got our double Jack last week. Now we're doing Kate's this week. And as opposed to Jack's episode, which I would say was a pretty crucial, important episode for the canon, both plot-wise and lore-wise, this episode, I'd say, is kind of the opposite. And while I've made the argument in the past that the episodes of filler, quote unquote, that we associate with traditional network television shows as opposed to kind of more modern streaming era shows are vastly different, I will say this kind of goes into the category of filler that's classified as negative in the sense of, while it still does provide important character backstory and context, unfortunately, I think a majority of this focuses, it's a combination of, there's not really anything major that this episode contributes as far as the lore of the island, at least the first one so far that I've seen this season, and not to mention that it's a solo Kate episode, as we're going to get into. Kate is one of those characters that, as time went on, was really not as interesting as some of the rest. It's kind of one of the only instances where kind of the movie stardom of the actress kind of overtook the character. Luke, you got any thoughts before we dive into this episode?
I'll just say that I think I'm in full Lost mode because the night after I watched this episode, I had a dream that I was on the island and Locke was there. Locke was there. The tide was coming in, like the island's telling, like we'll get to in a bit, but the tide was coming like in the episode, like, oh my.
The island has invaded your subconscious. Oh my God, yeah. Luke, you might want to avoid any flights in the near future. That's all I'm going to say, because this is, I'm not going to say this exactly how certain characters end up on the island, but you're not too far off, is all that I'm going to say. All of that and more on today's episode of Talkin Lost. Stay tuned. All right, Luke, season 1, episode 12, whatever the case may be. I think that's another reason why this episode loses extra points, because I think this is one of the only instances where the plot device in which the episode revolves around is also in the title. I might be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure this is the first. I mean, okay, yeah, you could technically say walkabout, but I feel like that would have had a lot more of a symbolic meaning, especially given that, you know, obviously John Locke tells you in the episode that he's going on the walkabout, but you don't really understand the significance until you see, as it's revealed at the end of the episode, that he's wheelchair bound, you know? And in this instance, like I was mentioning, it's another Kate episode, and obviously Kate as a character, it's one of the very rare instances where, again, this is a show that, despite its overwhelming popularity and success and cultural impact that it's had, I cannot say that the mainstream success of the actors has gone quite the way of some other shows. Like, I noticed this trend where a lot of really, really big shows that we had growing up, very rarely would those shows contribute to kind of the future stardom and careers as far as those people like really blowing up and becoming stars. They would also, they would always be big, and the actors would work a lot after the show, but they would always kind of be like confined and known as, oh, the guys from that show. You know, you would have exceptions here and there. You know, Bryan Cranston was already a pretty big well-known TV star before he had Breaking Bad, and that kind of catapulted him into superstardom. But this is really the time where, again, like, Shannon was in the Taken movies. Michael and Locke have been in a ton of movies and TV shows before and since. Matthew Fox obviously been in stuff. Josh Holloway's been in stuff. Charlie was probably the biggest name going into this show as being Mary from Lost. Boone in this season is also probably best known for playing Damon in The Vampire Diaries. He's probably much more well known for that show with modern day audiences. And obviously, as the show went on, they would bring in bigger and bigger stars. Famously, Michelle Rodriguez of the Fast and Furious franchise is a main character in season 2 of the show. But Evangeline Lilly, I would say, is probably the biggest quote unquote star to erupt from this show, given that obviously not super long after the show ended, she landed the Ant-Man movies, for which she was a pretty big staple. Obviously, she's not like a well-known leading person in the MCU, but again, she was in all 3 Ant-Man movies and had a tiny bit part in Avengers Endgame. So, obviously, I would say that of all the ones that had the most mainstream success, and obviously also for her comments and stance that she took pretty early on during the COVID-19 pandemic, I would say that she's the one that obviously had the biggest sort of mainstream success post-Lost, just from a stardom standpoint more than an acting standpoint. And what's so interesting is retroactively, Kate, I would say, is the character that for me is the least interesting, just in the sense of where she, yes, does have this tragic backstory like every other character that wound up on Oceanic Flight A-15 that eventually landed on the island. But as time goes on, it feels like they kind of run out of everything that they need to say about her. It feels like they figured that character out pretty early on. And I will say that there is a little bit of a reasoning for that as far as the backstory. If you guys remember all the way back in our pilot episode, I talked about how in an original draft of the pilot, when Jack was actually originally going to be played by Michael Keaton, the plan was for Jack to be killed in that opening scene in the plane with the pilot, not the pilot himself, and Kate was supposed to take over as the main character. And I don't know how much of that affected kind of the future trajectory of the character, but Kate, as we've gone on throughout the kind of canon, the history of Lost, was always the character that kind of felt to be on the back burner, and as a result, kind of always got stuck as kind of the pretty face. I mean, obviously, we're still early on in the show's run, and obviously, we'll see if our thoughts change as time goes on. But Luke, I mean, what are your thoughts on Kate as a character so far, especially now since this is her second solo, especially since she's the second character now after Jack that's had a second solo episode?
Yeah, unlike you, I'm only half a season into the show. But yeah, Kate, the second outing of Kate episodes, I will say it's probably one of my lesser favorite episodes. I wouldn't say it's like a bad episode. Like I don't think we reached that point. But yeah, just wasn't that invested. And I'm like, okay, she was a criminal, and I guess she killed someone, but there's not much more meat on that bone. And what she meant for a bigger role originally. Now what is she gonna do here? I'm more so interested in like just seeing how she fits into the dynamic. If she's not going to be like a super deep main player, how can she affect the greater story? Because I feel like there's still some kind of triangle with Sawyer and Jack being built there. They're trying to build something with Sawyer and her, especially in this episode.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, again, the majority of the plot of this episode revolves around, again, the titular case. God, that's another reason why I think this might be my least favorite episode. Just very, very obvious and on the nose title, which again, Lost up until this point has not been really known for. Again, every title I would say has been very significant for the theme, and also again I know I keep coming back to this. Obviously, again, these long running 22, 23, in this case 25 episode long seasons were again like the kind of the one of many internet punching bags in the streaming age, which saw drastically shortened TV counts. But again, it never ceases to amaze me how we're what, 12 or 13 episodes in to this first season, and this is the first episode that we've not hated, but like had some like, okay, this wasn't the best episode. Like, that's a pretty good run for a network show, all things considered. And as far as Kate goes, yeah, so I guess in order to kind of break that down further, essentially what this case is, it's another MacGuffin. I would say that this is probably, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that this is our first MacGuffin-centered episode, where the episode opens, you have Kate and Sawyer going on a little bonding trip throughout the woods. They end up discovering some more wreckage in a waterfall. They go for a little swim. They discover the titular case hidden underneath the set of chairs that they find. And obviously the big thing is Kate obviously recognizes the case. Sawyer, being his usual self, realizes that the case has some significance to her and just wants to know what's in it. She won't tell him. Cue the episode's main plot line, which basically devolves into once again another kind of semi-triangle that's built into, again, the love triangle between Jack, Kate, and Sawyer is one that, while it didn't really drive the majority of the plot, it was a overhanging plot throughout the majority of the series. Given, again, the attempted mystery at the backstory of Kate's character, which they would eventually pull back on. that again, it's the only really character backstory that I felt like depended on the mystery, because it felt like that what they had was very interesting versus all the other characters. It felt like just what you were watching was so interesting in the moment that once they added more and more, once they start connecting the characters who you thought would have no previous connection, it becomes like really fascinating and interesting and really, creates and adds to and crafts the lore. And Kate, again, once again, is an exception to that rule where, again, aside from her tragic backstory, which again, the only thing we know about her up until this point is that she's some sort of a criminal, engaged in various other affairs. She confesses in this episode that she killed someone, and we just don't know who. And obviously that's been, she's a person that's consistently been on the run. And so as a result, she feels the need that she has to be secretive with everyone. She can't actually, let anybody in, let anybody close to her. And I get all that, I do, but again, there's just something about it that feels a little unsatisfying, especially given, what the payoff is. What's it called? The biggest thing also too is that, oh my god, I'm really recycling through my repeat phrases here. Obviously, Sawyer tries to break open the case, doesn't work. She tries to go to Jack. Jack is like, okay, like, I'll open the case, but only if you tell me what's in it. She tells him what's in it. She's like, okay, it's guns for the marshal. He's like, okay, I'll help you, but I still don't believe you. But that's why we're gonna open the case together. They do it. She hides the key from him. What's it called? He manages to get the key from her. And, first there's a whole big thing where he tries to get the case from Sawyer. Sawyer doesn't give it to Jack. Then Jack obviously blackmails him by saying that he's going to stop giving him the, giving him the antibiotics for his infected arm. And then Sawyer gives him the case. It's fun. It's an interesting little, I will say that it's an interesting little bonding moment there between Jack and Sawyer that we really hadn't had before, where they kind of bond over the fact that they both kind of don't have this trust of Kate. And obviously it's for wildly different reasons. Sawyer is very clearly, playing up the romantic angle versus Jack is more so, again, just kind of skeptical of her, based on the fact that he's the only one that knows the truth about her, that she was the criminal that the marshal was, that the marshal was in charge of. What's it called? When on the plane originally.
What's her name? Jin or Sun overhears
Sun,
him.
no, well, that's the thing. Sun overhears it too. I'm glad that you brought that up. Once again, a little bit more hinting at the fact that that Sun knows a little bit more that she's letting on. What's it called? But more on that later. That's just a little. But that's a good thing that you picked up on. It shows you've been paying attention. What's it called?
It's lost. I have to.
Exactly. No, it's right. I'm really glad you brought that up, because I'm gonna tie that into it as a fact, because what I've noticed is that as more and more people have been noticing that I've been recapping Lost, I've been having more and more conversations about it with people, which of course makes me very, very happy, and it's making me realize a lot of things, and it's making me realize that Chris may have been more right than I gave him credit for back in 2020. That this really is one of the best shows ever made. But as far as the Jack Sawyer Kate love triangle goes, I did find that to be a really interesting moment where, even though again Jack and Sawyer for now still kind of don't like each other at all, they do have kind of their different reasons for distrusting Kate. And there's kind of that open acknowledgement that Sawyer is like, listen, whatever she's going to tell you, it's not going to be true. And Jack kind of has that acknowledgement of like, yeah, I know, but I have my own way of dealing with it. So like I said, they have to dig up the marshal's corpse in order to get the key from his wallet. Kate pretends like the key's not there. Jack immediately realizes that it's a sleight of hand. They open the briefcase. They go through. They find everything she was saying about the guns, the papers, everything. And it turns out that the whole reason why she was being so withholding and so distrustful is it was a little toy plane. That was what she was trying to get at. That was the whole centerpiece. And when Jack presses her about it, her whole thing is, oh, it belonged to the man that I loved, and I killed him. Kind of trying to pull a little Chinatown there. And I'm like, wait, that's it? Like,
I rewinded like the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Like, did I miss something?
Yeah, did I miss something?
There's
Like, that's it?
there's a plane.
Yeah.
Is this related to the whole plane? Like,
Exactly.
No.
And yeah, it's the first time that I've done that this season so far, where every other episode again had just this beautiful character arc wrap up, this beautiful catharsis. Never really, again, for a show that supposedly inspired so many questions, I really haven't had any questions so far after watching each episode. And yeah, this is the first one where that's done that. And I'm not going to say that I don't like that from episodes, especially given that, again, we're watching this week to week. But again, we're watching it pretty consistently week to week, back to back. But compared to, again, just what a solid run of episodes we've had so far, and for the payoff to just be that, and we don't even really get any answers, it's like, okay. Like, you could have done better. That's not to say we didn't get some great moments in this episode, too, because, again, we got a couple of B-plots in this episode that I think are particularly great. We got our first real instance of Rose, really since, I would say, since whichever episode it was. I can't remember if it was episode 3 or 4, where Jack had his little heart-to-heart with her, where she's basically comforting Charlie, who's still very, very messed up and torn up about Claire disappearing on his watch, blaming himself. And while that conversation isn't necessarily impactful plot-wise, Rose is another character who, as time went on, again, while never being really a major character, as far as kind of her role in terms of understanding very, very early on, very similar to Locke, that the island was kind of special and, you know, a lot more than just some random deserted island that they happened to crash on, I think is really, really important and significant.
Yeah, and there's something in the beginning that further supports my theory that the island is a force of its own. Like the tide is coming in. Oh, the tide is coming in. Sure, the island is pushing them forwards. Like, come on, guys. It's season 1. We're halfway. We have to start moving towards the island. So
Yep.
I'm furthering my current theory that the island is an entity of itself, not a malevolent force, say, but just some kind of force.
Luke, this makes me so happy because this tells me that you were the perfect person to co-host this show with me. It really does.
I've seen enough and read enough things to see what might be the connections in
But still, it's the fact that you're going for, like, actually deeper than the obvious surface level criticism, which, again, the biggest reason why I feel like people got turned off near the ending was everybody's like, it's purgatory, it's purgatory, it's purgatory, they're all dead, it's purgatory, they're not alive, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, that's supposed to be such an easy, simple cop-out, you know? That'd be, and like that answer is so simple and one note. And anybody who's followed Damon Lindelof throughout his entire career, you know, from Lost to Leftovers to Watchmen, and even a little bit with Miss Davis, he has always been so much more interested in not just the simple, clear-cut answers. Like, I don't know if you've watched Leftovers, if you have any interest in Leftovers, if you're going to watch Leftovers at any point during this run that we're gonna do. I just recently finished it, and basically what I will say about Leftovers is that while it's very heavily condensed and much more esoteric and kind of out there, even more so than Lost is, because again, it's HBO versus traditional network, it is still dealing with a lot of similar themes that Lost is. So it's very, very interesting watching these two shows kind of in tandem as far as being these interesting companion pieces where, again, it's a very similar thing where, again, that show doesn't necessarily give you any answers about the Great Departure, but if you're paying attention to each episode, you realize that all of the greater questions are answered. But that's the thing about these types of subject areas. You don't want clear-cut answers because it kind of takes away from the mysticism. What you yourself...
Well, we're going to be on this island for a while. I think we can... I can probably slot it in at some point.
True. Again, and it's only 3 seasons and 28 episodes as opposed to Lost's 6 seasons, almost 200 episode run. So it's a much quicker binge as far as that goes. The other major B plot that kind of happens here is Saeed and Shannon, the beginning of that small relationship where, again, it kind of starts off with, it's kind of funny where Boone basically kind of voices. It's been very interesting watching Boone's character arc as kind of like, you know, the guy who's trying to be the actual hero figure as opposed to Jack. But obviously, again, everybody kind of vilifies him for it, to kind of now becoming Locke's low-key de facto helper after the last couple of episodes, and now to kind of being, in this episode at least, an audience avatar basically criticizes Shannon, basically like saying, yeah, you're useless, you're not actually contributing anything, which is 100% true. That's the thing I love too, is that so far every single criticism of Shannon has been 100% on point, and this is the first episode where she sort of does anything. Again, I'm not gonna go out of my way and say that Shannon contributes a whole lot really to the overarching majority of the show, but it's nice to see in this episode, you know, kind of flashing back to, oh yeah, Saeed was trying to form a relationship with her at some point, you know, and this is kind of the beginning of that, where Saeed asks for her help in terms of translating some of Russo's charts that he picked up, and obviously, you know, she says, oh, I'm not that good at speaking French, yada yada yada, and it's revealed in the end that the reason why she recognizes the lyrics is because she remembers the man that she was seeing when she was in France had a son that would watch, again, that fish movie, which, again, we know growing up that she's talking about Finding Nemo, and it's Beyond the Sea by Bobby Darin, but in French. So that's a nice little note there. Also, even though we don't actually see them, we get a brief glimpse also of Boone and Locke going into the jungle, continuing to, you know, obviously inspect the hatch that they found last week.
I was hoping we would see more of that,
yes,
but I guess we have to wait a little bit.
Oh, that was a classic tune in until next time moment. And what's it called? And while again that's a very brief blink or you'll miss it moment. as far as maybe not being that important. It is quite interesting how Boone, when Locke asks Boone, he's like, you didn't tell anyone, or you're not sure if you told anyone. Very, very interesting how, again, that little moment that might be just mistaken for a character moment that might have some more significance, especially once we get into next week's episode, which, if I'm not mistaken, is Boone's backstory, Hearts and Minds. We finally get his next week. So, again, kind of like, breeze through a lot of the a lot of the plot there. But again, this isn't necessarily one that really ties in heavily with the island. And like I said, we didn't really have, to me, that interesting of a character backstory, because the backstory we got in this episode is literally just Kate going through a bank robbery and revealing that she is involved with the bank robbers and was dating the leader of the bank robbers, and then is revealed that she was just using them to get to some safety deposit box in the bank. And we don't even know what that is. Like I said, they don't tell you. So, I guess, sorry, I talked for a lot there. Usually this is more of a conversation back and forth. I apologize for that. But I was about to say, thoughts, give it to me.
Well, I can say that I enjoyed Sawyer's Looney Tunes efforts of opening the case. He climbs up a tree and drops it, and just a goofy moment from Sawyer. But yeah, I think we covered most of it. Some even just like small character moments, like Hurley and Michael laughing at Sawyer for thinking that he can open the case, just like reminding us that, yeah, these characters are still here. Like we have like 20, 30 unnamed characters, but the ones that we do have named, like,
yes,
they're still there. It's like we haven't seen Jin in like,
yeah, I was about to say, we haven't seen Jin in a minute.
Like, is he just fishing or something? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, because he'll be handcuffed to that. Charlie and Rose, that's one where, again, I again, very small, very brief, but I really, really, really enjoyed those moments between them, especially because, again, Rose is a character that Rose is not part of the initial credited 14, but she's one of the few characters, I'll give a little spoiler, Rose is one of the few characters that makes it all the way to the last episode. Which I would say about half of these characters, I won't say who, but about half these characters in this first season do not make it to that final episode for various and assorted reasons. So that kind of
new characters have to come in.
Of course,
you have to make room.
Right, of course. But as far as, characters being shuffled up the board, whether because they die or whether they just because they leave and such and such. But yeah, what were your thoughts on that scene, that sequence?
Yeah, it's just I don't quite remember all of the dialogue in that scene, but it was a nice, just like a sort of heart-to-heart between her and Charlie. Just like Charlie's going through it right now. He's blaming himself. He's kind of stuck. He can't help Claire right now. So yeah, he just frustrated, and if Rose can, calm him down a bit, that's good for them, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And then as far as Saeed and Shannon goes.
Oh yeah, if Shannon can figure out the French mumbo jumbo, like Saeed can't figure out the equations. Like you think he may be able to make sense to them. So is there more of the science side of the sci-fi going on this island that we are going to find out? That's past what we might recognize and what Saeed might recognize and what the residents of the island do recognize. So yeah, just more seeds of trees or plots that might grow in the future.
Yes, indeed. Oh God, this is another one of those instances where, again, just me as not a lost veteran, but somebody who's already seen the show, watching you as the first time viewer, just seeing everything for the first time. It's I love it. It makes me so happy that this is your first time watching the show, especially given that this is one of a few shows that I would say is worthwhile of this sort of discussion and breakdown. I'm going to be really, really interested once you get to The Wire as well, because that's another one that I think is well worth it. Exactly. Exactly. And I love how Isaiah Whitlock Jr. ends up leaning into that as time goes on, where you can tell it was one of those instances where in the first season he was kind of just having fun. It was like a little character catchphrase, like a thing that he just did. And then as time went on, with that kind of became like a well-known character, like he would just lean into it to a point where he would literally say it comically for like what felt like 10 straight minutes, and it was really, really enjoyable. Yeah, so like I said, not a massive episode. I would argue, I hate using this term as far as Lost goes, our first quote-unquote filler episode, because aside from some briefly good character moments and a brief exchange between Locke and Boone that's gonna play into next week's episode, not a tremendous not a tremendous episode, I would say. Especially, and again, like I said, I was amazed because after about the first, again, 10 or 11 episodes where every episode I would say was pretty important and impactful, I would say that this was the first one where it's just like, eh. And like I said, it may very well have just been because it was another double character episode, but again, given how awesome both of Jack's solo episodes have been so far, again, just for Kate, I'm like, okay, there was a reason why, looking back, Tabula Rasa was probably the weakest one of the first batch, and now as we're moving into the second half of the season, again, this one, we'll see as time goes on. So, like I said, we're hitting Boone next week with Hearts and Minds, and the following week, I believe we're hitting Michael with the episode special, and that's going to bring us into our last 4 that we're going to cover for December, for 2024. So, big episodes we're going to cover there. Like I said, we're going to take a break for the last week of December, and then we're going to come back first weekend of January after New Year's, and we're going to wrap up the entire first season by February. And then and then we're going to take a little bit of a break in for the month of February, just in order to cover some basic housekeeping before we get into season 2 in February. So with that being said, Luke, before we move on to I did just want to wrap up with this. The other interesting thing, before also we get into any movies or shows that we may or may not have watched this week, that's interesting about Lost is that, obviously, again, I like to come into each one of these show recaps with a thesis statement, with Talkin Thrones, with Pat that we did a couple of years ago. My whole focus was to try and figure out how the biggest show of all time kind of just went away, puff and smoke, out of nowhere after that last season, and if that last season had kind of ruined and tarnished the legacy of the show. And there was a kind of a lot of for lack of a better word, therapy that I was doing with my relationship with Game of Thrones. And obviously, again, now, obviously, with the emergence of House of the Dragon and Night of the Seven Kingdoms, it's safe to say that the world of Ice and Fire is back and bigger than ever, while not necessarily having the same impact of Thrones. And Lost was so interesting because I guess kind of my focus was, in terms of trying to figure it out, is trying to figure out, like, was this show as impactful as people made it out to be? And, did this go wrong, or was this yet another instance of where again, people misinterpreted it at the time because of the model? And as I'm rewatching it this second time around, I wasn't ready to answer that question this first time around, but now that I'm going through it and I'm remembering a lot more than I thought I was, especially knowing what's going to come later on, which I did not know the first time I watched this show, I think it is safe to say that it's an argument that I've been hearing about the show for several years now. I don't remember the first time I heard this, but I definitely heard it probably on like a Collider stream way back in the day when I was like addicted to watching everything that the Collider and the Schmoes had to pump out, which is that Lost was a binge model show made in network TV. It is one where, again, unlike every other network show that came before it, it was a network show that took its time with its storytelling, was very pinpoint precise, and unlike a lot of other network shows, really tried to make every single detail matter. And in a binge model, that works perfectly. But in a week-to-week, 22 to 23 episode model that has, again, about a month off for the Christmas break and then about 2 to 3 months off for the summer break. And then once you get into the shortened seasons, you have an even longer gap between seasons. There was a lot of stuff that people may have forgotten over the years, not to mention the vast amount of episodes that would eventually play in, and also given how deep and existential it got. To my knowledge, I don't think that there would ever been a network TV show that got that deep and existential as far as that goes, where, again, as far as the whole theorizing and everything goes, again, it was a pioneer show, to say the least, and it accomplished a lot of legwork that a lot of future shows are indicted to. And so I think it's safe to say that, again, while the show definitely has its flaws, I think it's safe to say that, again, there's a reason why this show is remembered as one of the Titans. And it's funny because I was literally having a conversation yesterday with my dad's new girlfriend, and we were talking about the show, and I was informing her that I was doing it for the podcast and everything, and she said, "Oh, like Lost, why are you rewatching that? Like, they never answered any questions." And I gave her the whole breakdown of it, and I'm like, I'm going to be very, very interested to see, again, and I don't want to toot my own horn here, but I have seen a lot more people getting into it, probably because of their relationship to me and because how they know, because of their relationship to me. And as a result, it is going to be very interesting for me to see kind of what the turnaround is going to be, because I know for a fact that another very good friend of mine from school, who may or may not be making an appearance on the podcast at some point in the future, has said that she just started the show, having never seen it before, and she is loving every minute of it. So it's always interesting to me to see how these things that we know as kids are having these second lives as they come around. We saw that happen all the time with movies that came out before we were born. But now that we're getting on, we're getting into our mid to, into our 20s, me into my 30s almost, and a lot of things that we knew growing up that may have been deemed controversial or bad that are kind of sort of having this turnaround now. It's very interesting to see. Again, I factor in, for me, probably the biggest instances have been the Star Wars prequels, the Michael Bay Transformers movies, and now Lost, I would say, is definitely up there. There's a couple other things that are on there too, but but I'm not remembering them off the top of my head right now. So that was kind of just my.
We could probably do an episode on that, just like general things that have been turned around on in opinion. But yeah,
definitely. There's a whole lot of conversation that we could talk about because it's definitely worth noting as well. It's funny because literally as I was trying to go to sleep last night, my brain randomly drifted. It was like, Star Wars: The Last Jedi. I know I really didn't like it when it came out, but now that I'm remembering it, there was a lot of good things filmmaking wise about that. Maybe I should do a rewatch on that. So that was just that's just a perfect example of that for certain. So with that being said, before we get out of here, Luke, any movies or TV shows that you wanna recap us on that you may have been watching this past week?
I have finished The Penguin, much like everyone else, and I hate that we have to wait 2 years for the continuation of that saga. But I think it's gonna live up to it. Have they taken that long? It's gonna be a good one. So
yes,
I'm hoping it's Court of Owls. There's multiple hints that they are moving towards that. And The Penguin is just again. Marvel and DC,
they are the pendulum is finally shifting. That's all I'm gonna say.
And we're getting Creature Commandos later in the year. We're getting Superman next year. So
we're finally getting it. The big DC after
things are actually finally coming out. They've announced 20 distinct things, and things are coming out.
Yeah, not to mention that trailer that dropped, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning.
I've been waiting for that all year.
F1 has competition now as far as being your most anticipated for next year.
Oh no, this was already
Oh, it was. Oh, I thought it was F1. I thought it was F1.
Dead Reckoning was my number one for 3 years in a row. And now this one has been my number one for a while. It's actually Superman is my second because I'm just really hoping that DC is good. Yeah. But this one, the Rabbit's Foot from Mission Impossible 3 is supposed to be back.
It's coming back. Maybe we'll finally get an answer as to what that actually is. Ironically, another J.J. Abrams directed movie from Mission Impossible 3.
It might be some anti-entity type thing.
It could be
if it ends up being that. I noticed that it's just really colorful. Maybe I'm just gray pilled from Red One trailers before every movie. Yeah, it's super colorful.
If Ethan Hunt winds up on the island from Lost at the end, I'm gonna lose my shit.
Will it be the last one? I don't know. I'm guessing no, but we'll see. And I'm continuing slowly through Daredevil. I'm still in season 1. I have time until March or whenever that is. Arcane, I haven't gotten to that yet. You have?
Yes, I have.
You can mention that quickly?
Yeah, I watched the first episode of the new season of Arcane, which dropped this past weekend. They're doing a similar release strategy to what they did with the first season, where they're dropping 3 a week. Based on the first episode, it's a continuation of everything that we loved from the first episode. It's much more plot heavy and focused. Still sad to see that this is the last season, but I will say that given how much it cost, which you pointed out to me before the stream started, it doesn't surprise me. I can't really talk more about it until as far as things continue further. But like I said, it's everything that we would have wanted from a continuation from that massive cliffhanger. It just sucks that we had to wait 3 years for it.
I didn't because I didn't watch it for 3 years.
True. What's it called? Must
the
be
benefits
nice.
of waiting.
The benefits of waiting. Oh, if only I still had that patience. What else was I gonna say? There was a couple of things. The Penguin. I wanted to get my thoughts on that real quick. I really, really liked it. Really, really solid show. Definitely one of the better shows of this year. TV for me has drastically shifted, obviously, in 2024 in the wake of the strikes, in the wake of kind of the end of the peak prestige TV era that officially ended last year. And what I will say is that my criticisms of the show still stand in the sense of where it is very, very, very much doing Sopranos. But the thing that I like is that it's not indebted to the Sopranos in a way that I would have thought, in the sense of where when the show started, with the way that they kind of very much were transitioning the character of Oz Cobb from the version that we saw in the Batman to kind of this much more so Tony Soprano-esque gangster type. And for me, again, if for anybody who's seen The Sopranos, the moment in the finale where, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry, there's no excuse for me to not having seen something in the digital age, when Oz kills Vic at the end, that was very, very, very reminiscent of one very pivotal moment in the final season of The Sopranos. For anybody who hasn't seen The Sopranos, they'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, to me, it was a great conclusion. It was a solidification of everything that was great about it. I really don't have too much else to say on it. But you also, I didn't realize we didn't get a chance to. You finally saw Honora, right? Or did we talk about that last week?
No, I hadn't seen it. I saw it on Thursday.
Yeah, so you finally got a chance to see it. So talk about it.
Yeah. So I would say the first 40 minutes are kind of whatever. It's this kind of love story that I didn't really buy into. I don't know if I was supposed to buy into it.
Definitely not supposed to buy into it.
No,
but I think the movie did a really good job of giving you the balancing act back and forth.
Yeah, but the performances were great nonetheless. But then, I don't know, 40 minutes to an hour in, the Three Stooges enter the movie, and it becomes like just so much better. Toros, I think Gorsky and Igor, like they play off each other so well, and Mikey Madison is just absolutely tearing up the screen with her performance. I'll certainly not be mad if she wins the Oscar. Then it's a really enjoyable comedy, and then it kind of slams on the brakes for the pacing for the last 20 minutes or so. Yes. But it definitely didn't ruin it for me. I still think it's a pretty great movie. If it wins Best Picture, it won't be my favorite Best Picture win, but I'll understand it.
Like, yes, very, very poignantly so, I would say. Again, as my good friend Michael Alvarez pointed out, when he saw it, he was like, the second half, at least until the last like 10 to 15 minutes when they meet up with the parents, is one of the craziest episodes of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which I think is a perfect, accurate description. It's hysterical. It makes you laugh. It makes you cry. It's everything that you wanted. I'm like, yeah, there's no way this couldn't be an incredible movie. And again, like I was talking about, watching Sean Baker's evolution as a director from Tangerine, which I believe next year marks 10 years since Tangerine, up until now, has been one of the most joyful parts of my film journey throughout the last 10 years. So definitely glad that you saw that. I don't think I've seen anything else. I didn't get a chance to watch Andrea Arnold's Bird yet. I'm going to try and see that. Also, I was planning on watching Clint Eastwood's Juror Number 2, which I've heard is very good. And obviously, this week we got another big Oscar contender. Emilia Perez drops on Netflix tomorrow.
I thought you were going to say Gladiator.
No.
Oscar contender?
No. Well, funny that you should mention that. So Gladiator 2, they've been saying could be a potential Oscar contender for a while now, but now you're seeing the pundits are starting to shift because after those initial test screenings have been coming out for Wicked, and even though I have voiced my massive discontent with the trailers, I remember having very similar thoughts to Hunger Games, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes last year, and that actually turned out to be surprisingly good. And I've been hearing positive things so far about Wicked. I'm not buying into it yet. I'm still holding out a lot of skepticism. Obviously, again, given my vast emotional attachment to the original IP, also given that it's another part 1, which again I have been very clear I am sick with very intentionally marketing. But still, it is a part 1, which I'm very, very aggravated by. But that being said, obviously, again, it's my favorite musical of all time. I want it to be good, But I guess what I'm saying is that now there are potentially some early drafts that Wicked could be the Thanksgiving Oscar contender, not Gladiator 2, like we originally thought. So that's something kind of early on that I wanted to that I thought was kind of interesting, that I wanted to point out as we're starting to move into the holiday season, as I call it, before we move into September. So hopefully I'll have more movies to report back on. Like I said, I was a little bit on vacation this past weekend, so it was a relatively movie-free weekend for me. So yeah, I'll definitely be able to report back on Emilia Perez and whatever other movies I'm able to catch up on this week and next weekend. But with that being said, Luke, thank you for joining me once again for another episode of Talkin' Lost. We'll be back to our regular Sunday or Monday scheduled slot, whichever one I decide on, and whichever one works out for the best of us once we get back next week. Where can the good people follow you in the interwebs?
Well, the year's wrapping up, so let's start making the top 10. So head over to Look Reviews on YouTube and stay tuned for January, February. I still have some movies to to watch that might make it in there.
Yes, indeed. But like I said,
Transformers 1 will be in there. I'm very happy about that.
Yes, it will. As we're getting closer to the year, as I'm starting to go over my list, starting to draft them out, I'm like, yeah, there's Transformers 1 is one of the locks. I have about 5 or 6 locks so far, movies where I'm like, I'm absolutely not budging on them, and I'm very, very happy to say that Transformers 1 is indeed one of them. So definitely will be putting that in there as well. So Luke, as per usual, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
I just said.
You did? Oh my God.
Reviews
Wow.
on YouTube.
Wow. My short-term memory brain. Holy crap. Wow. Oh man, that's how you guys know it's been a long weekend.
I think you need the island, Dom.
I need something. I don't know.
Something.
I don't know what I need. I need something, but it's bad. You guys can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, at Official Talkin TV Podcast across all platforms. You guys know all the rest. I'm not going to go into it today. As always, people, we'll be back next week for another episode of Talkin' Lost. In the meantime, watch more fucking movies.